Croeso pawb, welcome everybody to the brand new Anglesey Druid Order podcast. We are a sound podcast and a visual podcast as well, available wherever you get your podcast from. I am your host, Kristoffer Hughes, Chief Head of the Anglesey Druid Order, and I'm here on this very special day. Today we are celebrating Calan Gaeaf, the Welsh version of Halloween. So today is the 31st of October. We are here at the Anglesey Druid Order's office in Bedorgan on the island of Anglesey. But our office is also located in a community centre where there are all sorts of shenanigans happening because it's one of the holiest days of the year. So if you do hear some ambient noises in the background, please rest assured that it's not somebody screaming to get out of a broom closet, but rather just people having a lovely time celebrating Calan Gaeaf. So today, I am very, very pleased to say that I am in the delightful company of Jhenah Telyndru and Mhara Starling. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
So great to be here in your charming company.
Oh, you say such the loveliest things. Thank you very much. Now, just in case somebody has been inadvertently sleeping under a rock within the world of contemporary Western paganism, perhaps you might just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, where you're from, and why you're here.
I will do so, but not quite in that order. So I am from New York originally. The founder of the Sisterhood of Avalon. We're celebrating our 30th anniversary this year, so we've been around for a bit. I'm a member, happily, of the Anglesey Druid Order, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary, which is also lovely. I'm here visiting and spending time on the Isle, and a little bit about me, I guess. I have a master's in Celtic Studies from the University of Wales, Trinity St. David, and I love Wales, I love Welsh culture, I love Welsh people, and I love the gods of the Welsh, and that's why I'm here.
Yay! Well, we're very glad that you're here. And Mhara Starling, as if you need any introduction.
Hello. Yes, I'm Mhara Starling. I'm originally from just up the road in Aberfraw, here in Anglesey, and I've been practicing witchcraft magic since I was a teenager. And I met Kristoffer when I was a teenager and became immersed in this strange but wonderful world filled with magic. I write books on Welsh witchcraft, Welsh fairies, Welsh folklore and magic in general. And I'm also a fully paid up member of the Anglesey Druid Order. I hope I'm fully paid up, or else I might be getting a knock at the door soon. But yes, I'm really excited to be here and to talk with both of you today.
Oh, it's so lovely. It's lovely. So today is Calan Gaeaf, Norse Calan Gaeaf tonight. And I've always, ever since I was the tiniest kid, now bear in mind, in 1970s Wales, we didn't have such a thing as giant orange pumpkins. It was a bin bag and a Swede, and you just went round houses and sang silly songs, right? Do you remember that? Do you remember singing songs at people's doors when you were a kid? Or maybe you're a bit too young for that.
Maybe.
You know, we were just coming out of the 60s and into the 70s, so things were a little bit different maybe. But I've always had this utter fascination and maybe a bit of an obsession with Calan Gaeaf. And even when I decided, because I was a death service professional for 34 years, and which is kind of like Halloween adjacent, right? When you work in a morgue.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean? And, but I was always fascinated by that particular time of year. And I can't be alone in that thinking, particularly in the world of paganism. I secretly hope that everybody had that same obsession and fascination. But at the same time, I'm not sure why I was obsessed by it. I couldn't articulate it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was something that was there. I enjoyed the whole celebration, the fun of it. But I was, even as a young child, aware that there was something not sinister, that might be a word somebody might use to describe Halloween, but I didn't think it was sinister in a ghoulish sort of way. And I couldn't articulate if anything was sacred. So I could never quite put my finger on it until much, much later in life. And I wondered what were your experiences growing up with the secular Halloween and how that changed as you grew and developed within contemporary paganism? Was there a huge difference? Was there a shift?
There was definitely a shift for me because though I grew up here, it was in the late 90s and early 2000s for me. So by that point, American Halloween had been completely brought over, and it's something that I personally have grown to despise now, is this idea that Halloween is an American import, because that's something that everyone says. So many people on this side of the pond, they're obsessed with saying that, America brought Halloween to us. And the more that I grew up and kind of started immersing myself in the kind of the pagan past, but also the folk traditions of the past of our regions and landscapes and such, the more I kind of realized, no, it wasn't. It wasn't all just an import. But there are certainly elements that have been imported, like the big orange pumpkins and, the very specific kind of trick or treat traditions and the very commercialized aspect of it. But there was always, I think I agree with you in that I found almost a solace and a comfort in Calan Gaeaf, and it was always my favorite time of year. And I always justified that in my head as being, it was the one time of year that you could be anything you wanted, absolutely anything and anyone that you wanted to be, and nobody would question it. If you dressed up as a witch and you ran around the house with a broomstick cackling, nobody's going to turn around and, send you down to Bangor to get screened by the doctors there. It's just part of the tradition and the fun of it all. So it was a time of year where I felt like I could just be whatever I wanted. And because of that, I think I found it as almost an anchor in the year where I could just explore who I am. And I do wonder, thinking about you specifically, if perhaps your kind of drag persona and stuff as well also had its roots, its budding kind of, awakening in things like Calan Gaeaf, that ability to express yourself in that way. Because I definitely pinpoint a lot of almost my ability to express myself in a very queer fashion to Halloween growing up as well, because it was the only time of year where I felt like I could just go all out and be the larger than life person that I knew I was internally, but externally you'd often get judged for being that person. But then, yeah, I also, as I kind of grew into witchcraft and paganism and such, I kind of started acknowledging that that could then give me more of a foundation for seeing this time of year as purely sacred then, because then it was more than just a time where I could be free to be me, and also a time to acknowledge something that's bigger than us all. I don't know if you agree with that, Jhenah.
Well, I do. And I guess I grew up also in the 70s, but obviously on the other side of the pond. So I've directly participated in the commercialized Halloween. And it was always, again, similar. Same favorite time of the year, loved getting dressed up. And I used to dress up like Darth Vader, right? So I and had wanted to be Batman and fought my family about it. So I do understand what you're saying about that, like being who you want to be against all odds. And you know, I understand the criticism about how it has become commercialized, but I have to say that, especially as someone who has children and have taken them through it, I love that there is this pagan rallying point that all of these people are unconsciously or uh, participating in. So I feel like there's a part of my spiritual culture that the overculture that I am immersed in is participating in, and there's something very kind of unifying about that. But yes, as a pagan, though, I've had to, I guess, decolonize Samhain, decolonize Calan Gaeaf, and it really is quite a different energetic, and I love it. And being here at this sacred time is, I feel so privileged to be able to experience it in this way, because there is that distance, but being here where these traditions arose in the period, in the place, uh, I'm excited about what the portal will bring.
Because it's interesting because both of you expressed, and also it's true for myself, this fact that you could be somebody else and didn't have to feel that you were limited or restricted to your own persona or trying to fit in, which I guess implies that Calan Gaeaf, Halloween in itself, has a fairly transgressive nature to it, right? Because so much about this particular night not only crosses boundaries, it literally jumps over them and crunches it up and throws it away. There's so much discombobulation in where we feel we are within ourselves, and that comes from just a date, from just something that's happening to the seasons of the year, and the fact that it does affect us. For us, Calan Gaeaf means the Calends of winter, which implies that tomorrow is the first day of winter. And whilst meteorologically that's not seen as a fact, that's not something that exists in the secular world. But we could certainly feel it. And I think it's always been that feeling of Calan Gaeaf that was very difficult for a child to articulate, that called me to it, and that transgressive nature to it, which I find quite delicious.
It is.
I think for me, it's about that is a time of transition. So from the dark half, from the light half to the dark half, from summer to winter, from, starting the new cycle. It's a time outside of time. And so I think when you look at a lot of the traditions, there is, like you say, transgressive, or there is this idea of reversals. Boys dress like girls, girls dress like boys. What is in the other world is in this world. What is in this world is in the other world. And so maybe on some level as children, we were picking up on that, even if it wasn't explicitly stated. Yeah, it's a strange time where, what happens at thresholds can take root in our lives. And maybe we planted some seeds.
Very much so.
Weren't sure.
And I don't know if you noticed, but I think we're at a threshold right now because the
lights
power
just
has
went
been
out.
cut to the entire building. So probably by all of the Calan Gaeaf shenanigans that's happening behind this particular wall. So that's rather interesting in itself. But there's this, as I grew up, I got to appreciate not only how my culture engaged with Calan Gaeaf and how that fizzled out as well, probably because of the effects of not only secularization, but also World War I and World War II, which decimated our population. And those old traditions of, there's one called Hel Boyd Cenadameru, food for the messenger of the assembly of the dead, the Hwch Gutta, the tailless black sow, the Laddie Wen, the Manwenta, tending to the graves, being present in a moment with those forces that have always caused humanity some trepidation. But that there's also this concept that the veils are thin, that these spirits are able to engage with us. But I found that as I came into paganism, the thing that I struggled the most with was, what does that actually mean? How do I shift from what was essentially a monotheistic upbringing to suddenly a more polytheistic attitude or outlook or lens, but still bringing elements of my programming from my childhood into it? And I wasn't sure if I knew or could articulate what was meant by a spirit, because the fact that the spirits come back to us on this particular night doesn't belong in Christian doctrine. They're awaiting the last day of judgment, right? So who are these spirits, or what is the spirit, and how do we actually interact with them? I struggled to be able to explain to myself what that meant. I don't know if either of you have some pearls of sagacious wisdom or insight as to what is it that we're actually engaging with tonight.
I've always kind of struggled with a similar question. It's one that's been coming up a lot lately. I run kind of online events and such around this time of year as well. And this was a big question that came up lately in one of our recent events where we were discussing, for us as pagans, we often talk about spirits and ghosts and entities and deities, but it's really difficult to define those things in really neat terms. Even though we as humans, especially modern humans, we crave that. We crave that kind of classification, even though some of us might, think that we like to see things as a bit more liminal, a bit more grey. There is still that almost thing, that gnawing feeling at the back of our heads that goes, but what is this? What exactly is going on? And I've always struggled with defining exactly what, within this specific tradition of Calan Gaeaf, but also in a broader sense as a polytheist, an animist, and a witch, what is a spirit? What are we engaging with, and who are they? And is it something that has its own kind of autonomy and identity, or is it kind of an echo of something that once was? And I think something that you once said to me was, kind of a moment where part of my brain almost collapsed in on itself and went, oh my God, that's just thrown a spanner in the works even further now. And it was this idea of, when we die, do we remain the same? Do we remain who we are, with the same kind of weird quirks that we have? It's like, when I die, am I still going to, have intense anxiety and be really socially kind of terrible at being able to talk to people and such in a way that doesn't bring me these strange feelings? Is that going to dissipate when I die, or is that still a part of who I am on a kind of soul level? And when we look at kind of folklore surrounding ghosts and such, especially kind of within a Welsh cultural context, there is this implication that the ghosts are almost like they were in life. It's like they carry an element of who they were as a person in life. But then, is that what we believe about death? And I think that just kind of opens a whole kind of worms. And I haven't answered the question. I've just added more confusion to it, I think.
But it is a fairly big question.
It is.
Because often in the stories that I've read, either from folklore or even from modern stories, sometimes the spirits appear to us at Calan Gaeaf can also present themselves almost like an echo, as if they're not fully sentient, but rather an echo of something. So maybe there's that, but this concept of a veil that's thinning, I've always, in my own experience, perceived that as the spiritual dimensions and the apparent worldly dimensions at certain liminal points almost bump up against each other, maybe like bubbles, so that it's not as if they suddenly come into focus, but rather our awareness of that is brought into focus by some mechanism that we can't necessarily explain,
I just to build on that, I really do feel like any liminal space is where two opposite things are meeting. So it becomes a third thing. And what lore teaches us and what the myths teach us is that that's the gateway into the other world. These circumstances, places, and times of liminality. And we can create those circumstances or we can seek them out. And so I think that what then comes from the other world, because if we look at, for me, if we look at Annwn or Annwn, it's either the not world or the very deep. So the not world is a world adjacent to, contiguous with, touching ours, but the very deep for me talks about another way to get into that other world is through the self. So that through the unconscious. And so that opens up a realm of possibility that we might be dealing with archetypes. We might be dealing with metaphors. We can have the other world lead through in so many different ways. I know when I'm playing music and writing music, when I go into like this Hellenic flow, I seek out a threshold and then things come through. So that's what I feel like is happening. That's when the veils are thin, because we're moving through a liminality that has thousands of years of beliefs around it, and it holds that space, even though the new year has moved, but a lot of the traditions from Calan Gaeaf have moved to the new year. I know here, but yeah. So I think we're accessing that, and so to think about if we're in this time between, what can we use that threshold for? What can we learn from the shades of the past, our own shadow aspects of things that align with the dark half of the year? Because here's the thing, I tend to come to a lot of this from a spiritual perspective, but it's not that I don't feel like there aren't all of these layers. The gods are real, and they are symbols, and they are metaphor, and they are myth, and they are story, and they are allegory, and they are aspects of myself. And we can be in communion with any of them depending on the layer that we choose to be in, right? Because I think it holds the same transformational message. How are we taking it in, right?
Yeah.
So my point being, what was my point? My point being that I think the other world and the veils thinning and this threshold thing, it reflects back to us what we bring to it, what we bring to it. And when you live here, and your ancestors are here, you're in communion with your ancestors. When you live across the water and you're looking at it as if the other world is within me, what does it need to show me that is a reflection of what that dark half has to bring, or what I can plant for the light half? So I think there's so many different ways of approaching it.
Totally. And I think that's one of the aspects of Norse Calan Gaeaf that I really enjoy, is the opportunity to gather in a dumb supper, where we sit to feast in utter silence with just no electrical lights, just candlelight, and eat a meal in reverse order, which again is transgressive, right? It's going against the grain. It's a strangeness and an oddity that we're injecting into a moment. But the thing that I love, as you were talking about layers, all these different layers, and particularly Anuvn, the deep, the depth of me, is that it's during those particular spaces which may on the surface appear to be a fairly elaborate ritual, even though it's a group of people sitting down to a meal, but we're sitting down to a meal with the dead in mind. And in that silence, the only place you can go is in. And I enjoy, I'm not even sure if enjoy is the right word for what I feel within those particular dumb suppers, because deep within myself, that is where I then have a conversation with my ancestors. They're there in that moment. And I think sometimes, I love a ritual, right? And do you know what I mean? Not that I'm a drama queen, but I do love a ritual. But I also wish that maybe we had more opportunities to be still and silent and find that depth, because that depth is a veil. And using this time of year, using that particular ceremony enables that veil to become even more gossamer thin than it allegedly is tonight. And therein, I find my dead, and I don't suppose then it matters whether I'm communing to a spirit or I'm communing to a construct or an archetype or an element of myself, because in that moment, I'm having a real conversation with someone who's no longer here, but that I love and miss.
I think it's an interesting thing to kind of focus on there as well, is that there's a lot of conversations going on now in the spaces that I inhabit about the concept of, the veil thinning and all that. And there's a joke that goes around almost all the time at this time of year, which is, have you seen a veil? They're all thin. They're always thin. That's the point of them. They're thin. You can see through them. And I think there's a lot of kind of debate going around about how useful that terminology is and such. But I've always seen it as, for myself and my own beliefs, and if you kind of look at our myths and our stories and our culture in general as well, there is this implication that there isn't a separation between our world and the other world, that they are always intimately connected and mirroring each other, and we are always in communion with the other. It's just whether we acknowledge it and whether we're aware of it. And there's something about this time of year that I think that forces everyone, whether you are the most pagan in existence, draped in amethyst and velvet, going to the top of burial chambers to commune with spirits, or whether you're somebody who is completely secular and just knows of Halloween as kind of a slightly spooky time. There is something about the kind of transgressive and liminal quality of this time of year that kind of makes you subtly aware of things that otherwise you wouldn't be aware of. And to me, that's what this whole concept of the veil lifting or the veil thinning means. It's not so much an actual idea that there is this metaphysical veil that always exists between us and the other, and something or someone pulls the curtain strings at this time of year. For me, it's more the fact that we are able to go inward and we're able to consistently kind of acknowledge the ways in which our ancestors, the spirits of the dead, the spirits of the land, all of these things, they always interact with us and such. And I think that plays into what we were saying about this being this kind of a weird time of year, because even when we look at the history of, say, Halloween and such, we see it as a very kind of pagan thing today. But even the word Halloween comes from, Christian culture, hallowed evening, all that kind of thing. It means a holy night, essentially. So there is this kind of Christian connotation in there. And yet, like you were saying, there's elements of it that kind of go against the grain of what Christian culture seems to promote. And then when we look at kind of the way in which we experience Halloween, Calan Gaeaf, in the modern world, I said that I grew up with a very kind of commercialized, almost Americanized version of Calan Gaeaf, and yet in primary school, we were taught about things like Hallowe'en and Hallowe'en the Guta. And, my parents would say to me when we were going out for trick or treat, as we were like leaving the street to go with our friends to go knock on doors and collect as much sweets as we could, they would say to us, don't stay out too late, or the Hallowe'en the Guta, the black tailless
She'll get
owl, she'll get you. So there is still an element of that kind of folk tradition in there. So it is very much this constant kind of cross-pollination of kind of modernity and tradition mixed with the holy and the sacred and just kind of the fun, the frivolous. And it's all these things kind of coming to a head. And I think with all that, you can't help but be kind of flung into this numinous state of being where you are consistently, as this night unfolds, betwixt and between. So for me, it's less that, this night is definitely some time when some cosmic power pulls a curtain apart, and more a chance to really acknowledge those subtle things that are constantly going on. I don't know if any of that makes sense, but
I think it does, because you're talking about being aware of other things around you that may be so subtle that we pay them no attention, and that something like Calan Gaeaf, Halloween, can tug at that awareness. But when I look at the folklore of Wales and the bonkers things that used to happen to people, the interactions between people and other denizens of the other world, or fairies, the Tylwyth Teg, etc., and how they started to not become so commonplace and started to fizzle out. And I went to a fascinating talk by a cultural archaeologist once in Avebury, and he said something that I'd never considered before, and it was in relation to the veil, because this was just before All Hallows Eve. And in his opinion, the veil is something that we have had placed upon us. And he pinpointed it to the Industrial Revolution. And that post-Industrial Revolution, there were less and less accounts of people having encounters with denizens that could have been otherworldly. And that perhaps that advancement in our technology is the veil. And that these opportunities and these liminalities can cause us to go, oh, hold on a second. What's that?
It's interesting that you say that, because I've been thinking about this idea that, if you think about Calan Gaeaf and the cycle of holy days in Welsh tradition, they're tied into the land, they're tied into the agricultural cycle. And if you think about this idea that people who have been living on this island or in Wales have done so for generations, such that you could be working the same plot of land, growing the same things, using essentially the same technology for 1,000+ years. And it is the Industrial Revolution that shifted that, because now you're further and further away from the land. You're further and further from needing to be in right relationship with this landscape. So that there are these things, people will say, oh, the Mari Lwyd, some of these folk traditions, are they pagan? Are they modern? They only go back to when people first started writing it down, right, in the 1800s. But it feels pagan. Is it a pre-Christian residue? It doesn't really matter, because I think it's just a reflection of the cultural relationship with place. And when you're agricultural, when you've been doing this for so long in this place, this is how people have learned to navigate the challenges of seasonality, navigate the issues that come with, did we get a good crop? Are we going to make it through the winter? The real fear of not making it through. We need these cultural things to bring light into the darkness, to bring communal consciousness in times of isolation. And so those traditions and practices have a cultural, social, they meet cultural and social needs. And with the Industrial Revolution, with people not being collective, those needs kind of disappeared. And so from that perspective, I 100% agree. And not to say, I do love a good metaphor. I do agree that we have been, as a result of that separation, we're the veil. We are the veil. The reality of these things are veiled from us. They're hidden.
And it's interesting that you brought up the Mari Lwyd, because of course it is during Calan Gaeaf that we awaken Mari Lwyd Mon, which is our Mari Lwyd. And whilst that isn't traditionally associated with Calan Gaeaf from a folkloric perspective, it feels appropriate for our tradition, and we've been doing it for a while now. But you touched upon something there which I think correlates to this distancing between people and the land. And we see this sudden fascination and an uprising in so many different Mari Lwyd troops. Troops, is that what they call them? Not just here in Wales, but in other parts of the world as well. And people are fascinated by it, absolutely fascinated. And I don't think that in that fascination, they're questioning its antiquity, but rather its relevance to what it makes them feel in the moment. And we see that, don't we? When we engage with the general public for our Mari Lwyd events, we see a visceral reaction to this monster, this creature, this spirit that inhabits the winter. And I wonder whether what we feel in the Mari Lwyd is that fear that our ancestors felt, not knowing if they would survive the winter.
It's encoded.
Yeah.
It's encoded.
And then suddenly you have an embodiment of something which is, it is dead, but it's alive.
It brings fertility. It brings luck. When you look at it, the last thing you're thinking is, this is my lucky day.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, it's not an amorous image.
Right, right.
But it's a powerful image. And I think because, again, Industrial Revolution, the way modernity is, we don't have to worry about the winter.
That's right.
And perhaps the Mari Lwyd and those figures that populate the Calan Gaeaf season, because of course it's more than just this one night. This is just Norse Calan Gaeaf.
Right.
You know, the whole season for me lasts all the way up until the winter solstice. You know, and that the spirits, the entities that populate that season, they speak to that element of us which is afraid of it, because we've always been at the mercy of the land. And now we don't feel that we are.
That's right.
That we can control that, but we can never control it.
So winter is a dangerous time.
Mm,
We're close to the ancestors because we're close to becoming ancestors, right?
That's
and
a
that
good
was a
point.
very real
Mm.
thing that lived in.
And I think something like very interesting about our modern world as well is that I think we've become afraid of being afraid to the point where there's almost this taboo around feeling afraid now. And I see it a lot with like conversations when we talk about things to do with our magical and spiritual traditions. It's like there is this tendency, and I'm probably going to be absolutely roasted for saying this. Somebody's going to psychoanalyze it, I bet.
Brace yourself.
But there is this tendency nowadays where people seem to be under the assumption that you have to be 100% comfortable all the time. And I think that's a very modern mindset, because in the past, there was no choice. You will be uncomfortable, you will be afraid, you will face the dark, you will face the cold, and this time of year embodies that feeling. And I think sometimes we connected from that because we don't have to in the modern world. You know, if you are struggling because it's dark, flick a switch, the light is on. If you are struggling because it's cold, if you're lucky enough to be able to afford it these days, you can turn the heating on, or you can make a fire in your house. So all these kind of...
If you're lonely, you can text a friend.
Yeah, if you're lonely, you can text a friend or go on Facebook and post a rant, whatever you want. Like, just post something on there on your status going, oh, just at the hospital, ... Wait for the interaction. You can have it.
Vague booking.
There's no normality of being uncomfortable or afraid anymore. And that, I think, and this is where it might be controversial to say, has seeped, that idea that we have to be comfortable and safe all the time, has seeped into our spiritual and magical traditions to the point where you get kind of criticized now if you perform a ritual or an initiation, or if you ask something of those who are undergoing initiation that requires them to be uncomfortable, that requires them to question their reality, that requires them to be a little afraid. But it's in those moments, I personally feel, that is when initiation happens. That is when the other is so apparent to us. And it's why I love this time of year, because it gives us permission to be afraid, to be a little unnerved by the world around us, to
It's unsafe, right? It's an unsafe time.
And that kind of is a bridge between us and the other as well. And one thing I love about the kind of Calan Gaeaf traditions and such is that in that fear and in the uncertainty of everything, we find, strangely, deep community.
Mhm.
Because when we are aware of death and aware that death is coming for us all, we don't find ourselves as separate to the dead. We see ourselves as in community still with the dead. And that's been a big part of kind of something I've been trying to rewire in my brain since I've started kind of looking at this time of year as a sacred time rather than just the frolics and fun of Halloween, is that this time of year to me is that bridge between community where I remind myself that I'm not separate from my ancestors, I'm not separate from the dead. They are part and package of my community in every single way. And it's at this time of year I kind of remind myself that they're alive in everything that we do. They might be 6 foot under, but they are constantly alive. And I'm sure like it's this time of year that I always kind of make myself aware of little kind of mannerisms or things that I do that I go, oh, that's my tide, that's my nine coming through
Yeah.
there, or
Yeah.
that's Julie. Sometimes I'll say
Yeah.
something and I'll just be like, that's my friend that passed away, that's her voice coming through now. And because of the kind of association and symbolism of this time of year, I stop myself whenever those things happen. I go, there she is, still alive, still living through me, through the things that I do, still experiencing life in a small way. What is remembered lives, and they are remembered in our bodies as well. They are part and package of the community just like us. And it is the spooks and thrills and chills of this time of year that kind of remind us of that and teach us that we're not separate and we are still in community with them. I don't know, I kind of love that.
Yeah, we were talking similarly earlier on. We went and visited my family's graves at the local cemeteries and how I feel them as a part of my community all the time. But we had a conversation about that, about ancestry and how ancestry can perhaps cause us to feel rooted in place, but also how not all the time. Not necessarily, it's not a guarantee, because you were talking about your ancestors from Europe and how your connection to them was very different to mine,
I
right?
think a lot of Americans are probably in a similar boat because we're not of the land where we dwell, most of us, of European extraction. But if we go back to those countries, we're not of that either. So we kind of dwell in this liminal place. And I think that's part of the reason why I know for me, because I follow a path that is not tied into place where I am or lineage or heritage, I want to know as much as I can. I want to study. That's my way in. So it's not through my ancestors. I'll look at spiritual ancestry,
Yes.
right? But it's for me, it's through tale, it's through myth, it's through practice, it's through learning language, as well as I can do that. Or, that to me is the way in. And yeah, so I wish I had that ancestral place, but I think a lot of Americans, this is something that I always talk about. If you are not from a place or you're not from a culture and it's not part of your heritage, then I think that if you want to participate where these are open practices, that's important for you to immerse yourself, find some way of practicing culture, listen to native voices, go into the source materials, know what you're talking about, show respect, because I think working with you show respect for the gods and you show respect for the culture that birthed them. And so I think we're very mindful of it there. Hopefully we are because we're kind of orphans in a way. We're orphaned from our ancestors. And so what do you do? How do you practice?
So you have spiritual ancestors
Spiritual ancestors.
that sing more to your, I guess, sidekick constitution, to that subtle, numinous part of yourself, which is connected to it all, I guess. But I have, even though I appreciate my ancestors are buried in the soil of this island, and I feel very much that I am their sum totality, and that is a gift. Like you were just talking about this continuation of the song of the ancestors, and that for this period in the year that we get to celebrate that. But at the same time, I feel a tinge of not necessarily sadness, but I feel sometimes as if the rest of the world out there is missing out on that particular connection, on the fact that we do have this period of time that's set aside to be able to talk about our loss, our grief, in a society that doesn't want us talking about that.
Right.
It wants productivity, efficiency, go back to work. You can have 3 days off. My cat's dead. You can't have any time off. But that poor pussycat could be the pinnacle of that person's life. Do you know what I mean? That we're like a death-denying culture in the West, and that this gives us that opportunity to be able to open channels of dialogue and speak not only about what it means to lose, what it means to love. The price we pay for love is the pain of loss, and that. But I felt saddened. So this morning, right, believe it or not, this goes to the gym. Don't look at me like that. It's true. So I was in the gym this morning in one of the classes, and we were talking about Halloween, Calan Gaeaf. But to the majority, and it was the majority of the voices that were there, it was just seen as nonsense that has been imported to make money for the candy companies. And whilst there's an element of that, which is true, that candy companies are making millions over Halloween.
I will tell you, I will buy a cauldron mug.
A cauldron mug?
Well, just to speak to the commercialization of it, you're looking for at the bright spot. You get candy and you get cauldrons.
There's always something pagan adjacent that we can buy, right?
Right. So
During
forgive me. You're making an excellent point, and I derailed you.
And that, so I was explaining to them briefly, and they were so surprised at my expression of what Calan Gaeaf actually meant to me, but not just to me, but also what we know about Welsh culture and how our ancestors connected to it. And they were really surprised and I think moved to discover that it has this hidden depth. But I also felt, wow, that's half of this particular space that didn't know that about their own culture. So then I felt bad. I'm like, oh my gosh, am I doing enough? Am I doing enough to tell my fellow country people? We used to have these gorgeous traditions, and it isn't just about not putting a jack-o'-lantern up, turning all the lights out and hiding behind the sofa because you don't want the trick-or-treaters coming, but rather turning it into something that has meaning. And certainly, I mean, I know we're out there talking about this and doing stuff, and one of our druids, Carisoleria, I mean, she's gone stratospheric with it all. You know, every Calan Gaeaf she brings out a TV show or a radio show, and she's out there talking about it, and music, comedy, and it's remarkable. And I feel as if there may be a turn in the tide where we might suddenly stop and consider as a culture, oh, hold on, elements of this trick-or-treating was always ours to begin with, you know, and you can almost see it, can't you, reflected, particularly in things like they got Solod, Helbwyd Cenad and Meirw. They were knocking on doors and singing songs and getting food and
what the other world brings is either a trick or a treat, depending on how you show up in relationship to it, right?
Yes.
I mean, so it's a little on the nose.
It is a little on the nose. But I do sometimes feel slightly saddened that the illusion that it's a commercialized, and that's it, it's a commercialized holiday, full stop. Whereas we're aware that it has this other depth to it that requires so little in the way of candy, but so much of yourself is given within its true meaning, right?
And for me, I think another iteration of it can be how you're in a relationship with yourself, looking at the dark side of the self, looking at the remnants, the ancestors of, you know, what you need to leave behind, right? The dark half of the year gives us an opportunity to look into that mirror. So I think you're looking at a cultural wound around it. And this is the perfect time to contemplate the dark half.
Yeah, because I feel kind of a similar way when I talk to my family and such, and sometimes I feel a little disingenuous because as somebody who, you know, writes books on this stuff and makes videos and does talks and stuff, there is kind of a part of me that sometimes feels like, am I selling a little bit of a half lie because I talk about, you know, the traditions of Calan Gaeaf, but then when I actually go home and I spend time with my family, my nine, my mother, my siblings and such, they don't do any of this at this time of year. You know, to them, Calan Gaeaf is just a time they have to buy a costume for their kids. They have to buy sweets to put in the house. My mother loves it. She decorates the house. She puts she's at the minute setting up a graveyard in her front garden, which is going to blow away because it's a storm right now. So like to them, it's just a fun time. And when I talk about what we do as Calan Gaeaf, whether it's as druids, as pagans, whatever, there is this almost disconnect. A lot of my siblings do find it interesting, but they do sometimes go, I've never heard of that, you know, even though they've been raised Welsh, they speak Welsh as their primary language and such. Like, I've never heard of that. And the closest I've come to it is when I talk to my nine, my grandmother. My grandmother does have memories of partaking in certain things when she was younger, but they were still kind of almost fun, frivolous games to her, even though when you kind of scratch the surface, you're like, that wasn't just a game, there was something else going on there. And that game has continued in the village I'm from, which is, so every Halloween it's become a tradition that the kids of Aberfraw, I hope they still do it. They did it when I was a kid, at least anyway, where they wander around the graveyard, and I like to call it now, I like to try and kind of pretty it up and turn it into a ritual in my head. I say, the children of Aberfraw, they circumambulate around the graveyard. So it's a tradition where you have to start at one gate, and you then, the way the churchyard in Aberfraw is set up, there's a gate here, and there's another gate on the opposite side. And what children will do is they'll walk around it, going through both gates 3 times. And on the 3rd time, and depending on which generation you're from, my mother's done it, my grandmother's done it, and such, and it changes over time. The idea of what happens at the end switches a little bit. So originally, from when I was talking to my nine, my grandmother, they said that it was a way of figuring out who in the village was going to die the next year, which is very similar to traditions that we see in places like Llangefni, with Anglesey is the most famous one. He's a spirit who comes out at Halloween and reads from a book all the names of the parishioners who are going to die that year. So it's kind of similar to that, but instead of a spirit, you will come face to face with some kind of ghost or ghoul who will tell you who's going to die. And then over time, that translated into different generations, into different kind of versions of it. So by the time I was a kid, it was just that if you do it 3 times, you will see the apparition of a ghost at some point. So it's just kind of a fun little trick we would do.
The death omen falls away.
Ghost. And it's like, I love that those traditions still persist. Hochde Gutta still persists and such. But there is something about the aspect of it where we are remembering our dead that is kind of being lost. And to this day, like people, like you say, don't have that time where being able to talk and remember about their dead is being facilitated, which I've always found odd, because in kind of the overculture that we all live in, it's kind of absurd to say this out loud, but you know, the overculture's main religion, Christianity here in this region specifically, even though that's dwindling now, and the census is showing us that Christianity is depleting as well. But in that main kind of religion that most people who are religious ascribe to here, it is essentially a death religion. It's all about death. It's all about dying. You will not start to live until you die, essentially, and you have to live a certain way in your physical life in order to reach a certain thing in your death. So it's all about death, but they can't talk about death, and they can't talk about grief, and yet we, on the flip side, I would say paganism and such is more of a life religion. We focus on life, and we don't constantly have these fears about how we're supposed to act in this life in order to benefit us in death. But we seem a little more open to talk about death. But I think there is kind of a deconditioning we have to do that. And I do find that sad that, you know, we have this tradition, we have this time of year that has all these associations, and yet still to this day people don't have that depth of tradition underlying this time of year. Something has gone, and I hope that what we do awakens people to it a little bit.
We see so much of it in the Northern Hemisphere, particularly around the harvest, where there are so many festivals that focus on the ancestors. I've been very lucky to spend a Halloween Calan Gaeaf in Mexico for the Dias de los Muertos, which was phenomenal because the dead were central, right? It was all about honouring the dead and having those 3 days at the end of the harvest just before the coming of the winter to be immersed and engaged with your dead. And I don't think it takes people a lot of encouragement to flip over to that particular mindset, because for years after we do whatever all the dumb supper and shenanigans that we have for Norse Calan Gaeaf Halloween night, the following day or the day after that, the third day of Calan Gaeaf, it would just be me and my nine. And I used to slather those up all over Facebook. And my grandmother, my nine, she never really engaged in much during Calan Gaeaf other than perhaps she'd buy us a Swede or maybe she'd fashion a bin bag into a cloak. But that was it. That was all her involvement. But as I grew up and started taking her on the cemetery runs, as she used to call them, to engage and talk about and with the dead who had passed in the previous year, and it filled her with a delight that surprised her. So every year she'd be telling all her friends down in the cafe and the coffee shops, oh, what are you doing the weekend? I'm going around the graves with my grandson. What are you doing that for? It's Halloween, that's why. And then she'd have these conversations, right, with these people who were like, well, I wish I had a grandson that did that. And she's like, well, tell them to go and speak to the druids. They'll tell them what to do. And it was just such a lovely, beautiful thing to do with my nine, who I adored, to spend a whole day just talking about our dead. And it's healthy, it's cathartic. And we have this period in the year that permits us to do that. And a part of me does want to jump on a soapbox and scream, look, people, look what we can do. We can talk death and don't have to fear it.
And it passes on family tradition. So I'm sure you talked about stories of her contemporaries and her elders. And so that brings you into connection with generations before you. And that just, weaves you into the web of family in a beautiful way.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it doesn't take much for people to flip, because when I did the documentary with Cadisoletti that you did as well, and then when your death documentary series came out, the amount of people in my family who would come up to me and go, oh God, that documentary was really good, wasn't it? I wish we did things like that. I wish we did more things like that. And I would just tell them, why don't we? Why don't do it? Do it. It's not that hard. We do it. So do it. And they would they'd have this look almost like, are you giving me permission? I was like, you need permission? Just do it.
But sometimes I think that's exactly what people need, It's just a little nod of encouragement, perhaps, of like, oh, I can do that. So, well, of course you can. It belongs to you, right? It belongs to you. And it's peculiar because I come from, a death service professional background where, I've seen the dreadful results of people not talking about death, people not putting their wishes down. And maybe that is a very healthy thing that I see, and I'm sure you see within pagan communities, that we are more open to talk about, a simple ceremony would literally be people gathering in a circle and asking for the people in that circle to pay witness to their statement of, if I die between now and next Calan Gaeaf, this is what I want you as my community to do for me. And we don't have those conversations in the secular world, but maybe we should. I mean, and even though, to say that that isn't something that the secular world talks about is not entirely truthful, because there are death cafes,
That's right,
the death salon, and more movements associated with hospice care or end of life care that are open to dialogue. But
it's new and it's
new.
growing, right? I still think it's a small percentage, right? Because so much of it is hidden away, or grief is pathologized, and so it's reclaiming a human experience that we all experience. We will all die. We will always know someone who has died.
Totally. But even like sitting here, I don't know if can you smell the smell?
Yeah, little dance.
So I know it doesn't come down the camera of like smell-o-vision, but behind us we've got, we call them bogan rutan, which means a Swede or a rutabaga spirit. And that's what we carved when we were kids. But they have this smell. And it's the smell of Calan Gaeaf, right? It's the smell of it. So can you smell it? It smells like toasted root vegetable.
Okay.
Can you not smell it?
No.
And smelling that, just sitting here chatting on this day, I can sense, feel, my nines, my nania. Is that nine in the plural? Oh my gosh, how do I not know what nine in the plural is? Nania. My nana, my grandmother's. Like here now. Because smell is such a powerful thing, right?
That's right, connected to memory.
Yeah. Brings it all flooding back. And I think I feel very lucky that I had those tendencies for the proclivities of Calan Gaeaf as a child, and that I've been able to grow up and still hold on to not only the innocence of it all, but also the awe of it and the fear, and embrace all three of those things, in dress up, cross those borders, break those parameters, put the candles in your window. And I feel almost a sense of anxiety if I haven't lit the candles in the window. If I'm not going to be home that Norse calendar, it's like, oh, so I have to make sure that there's electric battery candles in the windows just in case they miss it. But it fills my spirit with a joyousness, but also with an acceptance of grief and the power, the immense power of loss. Because that surely unites us all as part of the human condition. And that's all wrapped up in this peculiar little night.
It's a transition. And when we lose someone, we have to transition to life without them. When we experience fear, it's a shift of consciousness. And so I think that helps the other world be near as well. All of those threshold things that
brings those bubbles together.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. The wind. I was just suddenly aware of the winds howling, thinking Ian's going to have to edit this bit out. But actually, no, the Eshish coming from the west. The spell. Because I don't know. You've lived on this island the majority of your life, just like I have. And I was telling Jhenah earlier on in the car when we were faced with those winds and the rain that you only get on Anglesey. And I was telling you how I can't actually count consciously from any sense of concrete memory that I've ever experienced Calan Gaeaf that was calm and dry. But that somehow it lends itself perfectly well to its liminality.
It does. There's something about that sound of the wind kind of brushing up against the buildings and the way it kind of creaks and howls that to me embodies the spirit of Calan Gaeaf. And I think going off of what you were saying about how this time of year is just so kind of important to us now, and has been for a long time throughout all of history, I do kind of, like I was saying at the beginning, there is this almost annoyance I have when I hear people say that it is just this imported thing that doesn't mean anything to us and that it's just silly and frivolous and all this. But similarly, I have a similar annoyance with pagans who will kind of go, oh yes, I like the Samhain stuff and the Calan Gaeaf stuff, but the Halloween stuff, the silly kind of dressing up and doing all that, that's silly and I won't do that. I'm a serious pagan, I won't do that. I'm like, but that's part of it. It has always been part of it. And there's something about sitting here, like you're saying, with that smell, with that sound going on outside, and with the fact that it's starting to get dark, that kind of twilight is hitting me. It reminds me of, the smell of the weird kind of rubber masks used to be made of, the makeup that we used to put on. And I'm kind of going into this nostalgic moment now. And to me, it's like, all of that is part and package of why I love this time of year so much. And there's a part of that kind of fear and the flamboyance of Halloween, which is also embedded in the history of Calan Gaeaf. It's like we were saying, it's a transgressive time of year. There are traditions across Wales where boys would dress up as girls at this time of year, and people would dress up as gwrachod, which were like hag witches, basically. And all of that is part and package of the tradition of this time of year. The Hochdig Utsa is a scary, sinister thing that lurks in the shadows. So it's not all kind of sacredity, and is that a word? Sacredity, sacredness, and
because it's mischief, right?
Yeah, there is mischief to it.
It's mischief night.
And that's coming anyway, isn't it? I've seen that in my research that some of the things that happen on Guy Fawkes is kind of an extension of what would have happened on Nos Calan Gaeaf.
Yes,
right?
very much so, especially when you look in Welsh folklore as well. The thing that is missing today, we might see some elements of the tradition coming back. I mean, you know, you have to look up on the wall in our office here. There's a modern piece of art of the Hwch the Gwta, you know, the tailless black sow. She's there. There are elements which are coming back into popular art, popular imagination. And but the coil certh, which was the bonfire, everything finished with the bonfire.
Yeah.
Elements of divination would be employed, but there was always a bonfire, right? And of course there's Guy Fawkes Night, which is so painfully close. Now,
That's right.
I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to look this up. People would have to Google it. But was the 5th of November the actual time that Guy Fawkes was executed? I don't think it was it?
I don't know.
I think it's like conveniently there. Maybe it's conveniently there. I could be totally making this up, by the way, because of its proximity to Calan Gaeaf and Halloween,
Yeah.
and its fascination as having this bonfire that was central to those celebrations, the climax of that.
And
Marisha
if any,
Valion
yeah.
made the connection
Yeah.
between Calan Gaeaf and Guy Fawkes.
Oh, yes, of course.
And if anyone's listening
Yes.
and they don't know what Guy Fawkes Night is,
Oh, so Guy Fawkes Night is a peculiar thing where we celebrate the only person who ever walked into Parliament with honest intentions. And his intentions was to blow the whole place up, but unfortunately he was caught and he was executed. Now it's proclaimed within folklore that Guy Fawkes was executed by being burnt at the stake, but he wasn't. He was actually hung by the neck until dead, and he didn't even provide the hangman with the luxury of that. Oh, I think he was going to be hung, drawn and quartered, wasn't he? But he actually launched himself off the ladder and
His own
asphyxiated himself on the gallows beforehand. So there's so much folklore associated with Guy Fawkes, and it's very close proximity to Calan Gaeaf. So I think, in my mind, that coil certh, bonfire, what did they call them when they were all up on the hills? The beacon fires, the need fires, the beacon fires. Yeah, I think all of those traditions have blended and bled from Halloween into Guy Fawkes. So the coil certh is still there,
yeah.
but it's like 5 days later, right? Which I don't really mind at all, because even though tonight is Nos Calan Gaeaf, as far as I'm concerned, this is a season. I mean, this isn't going to go out at Calan Gaeaf itself on Halloween, but it will be going out within that season.
And what's really funny about Guy Fawkes Night's bonfire night, as we call it nowadays, is that there is this tendency nowadays, especially because the world is busy. We're all busy, we're all working all the time. So I've noticed that there's a lot of festivals and fun fairs that take place now that combine Halloween and bonfire night, Guy Fawkes Night together. So it'll be like, oh, come dressed up, there'll be a party for kids, they'll be bobbing for apples, and there'll be a massive bonfire. And when I see posters for those events, I think, oh, that was it, wasn't it? That was how it was back in the day.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is still that kind of almost echo of what we used to do, and it's kind of coming back because, and weirdly, because we're all busy, because they want to squish these things together now. Because who has the time to do both of them at in the same week?
And I think that, that observation is so right, because we barely give ourselves time to breathe, and I really value that opportunity. Even today, you know, in the pouring rain, just to go and stand at my ancestor's grave just for 5 minutes and just like say thank you, I am here because of you, and to have those spaces, I think is really important. So with that in mind, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you, who will you be remembering this Calan Gaeaf, and why?
Aw. Well, my mother, she's been gone for 19 years, so it's been a long time, but she's the closest to me that has passed, you know, grandparents and things of that nature, friends even. But it's been interesting, you know, spending the last 20 years without my mother and my kids without their grandmother. And so I'm just feeling like I always feel her close at this time because, yeah, That's my primary ancestor, I guess.
What was her name?
Irene.
Irene.
Yeah.
Oh boy, did he gael ei chofio. May she always be remembered.
Deal
What
with
about
that.
you, love?
I think the main person that's kind of on the forefront of my mind this year is my Tide. We called him Tide Mumu, so Tide is grandfather. Tide Mumu because he lived on a farm in Engaddi, and he only recently died this year. He was my father's father, and I spent so many years on that farm. And my nine on his side, his wife, died when I was very young, and I used to kind of see her as almost the awakening of my interest in witchiness because there were rumors that she liked to read tea leaves and tarot cards, and she always had these long acrylic nails, usually painted green, and she'd tap them on the windows as we like got to the farm. And they lived in this like just middle of nowhere beautiful place, and I didn't get to see my Tide for the last few years. And then yeah, recently found out he just died sitting in his chair as he always was. Very peaceful death apparently, very quickly, suddenly he just went. Um, and yes, I'll be remembering him. His name was Will Hughes.
Oh, well, boy, did not gael ei gofio. May he always be remembered.
And you?
You? It's funny, isn't it? Because there's so many people that come to mind during this particular season. But sitting here now, I'm suddenly aware of someone, and I feel as if I need to take notice of that. You know, within this moment with the smell of the Bwgam Rudan behind me, and that's Myfanwy. Myfanwy Davies. She died in 2005, and she was a most amazing woman. She was very much occultist, but also a folklorist and a kabbalist, and she loved anything that was occult or occult adjacent. And I always consider that she was my first mentor, I guess, and she was extremely encouraging, and she wasn't very able-bodied, but she was so able-minded. She was so large of mind, you know, and even though she was frail of body. And she's been on my mind a lot recently, and that it's 20 years since her death, which I find quite incredulous. And she would have been the one who would have been the most proud of what we've done. She would have been so, or is, proud. So yeah, she lived in Rhyl. She was fabulous. She had glasses, right? We used to take the mick out of her glasses. We really did. She had, bless her, her eyesight was not so good, and she had these glasses that looked like the bottom of milk bottles. You know, she could still see Halley's Comet through these things. And they were always smeared with her fingertips. And we were like, can you see anything through those glasses, Myfanwy? And we really used to take the mickey out of her, but she loved it. She loved the community of people, and we would drag her, her little crippled body, we'd drag her to the middle of forests to celebrate Calan Gaeaf, celebrate all of the seasons. She's like, oh, I don't think I can do that. Well, you can. We're going to drag you up there. We have to put you in a sedan chair. And she would come alive. And I so wish that she was here to see it all, you know. But I think because I'm aware of her, I'm going to take that as the fact that she is here. So, Myfanwy Davies from Rhyl, boy did he gael ei chofio. May she always be remembered. Yeah. Well, do you know, we have to get ready for the liminal because the sun, I think, has just about set. And we need to transform this room into a space for a dance supper. So, how about that? Yeah?
Fabulous.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much, Mhara and Jhenah. And where can you be found? Where can people find you?
In the caravan in the hedge, which is where I've been the last four months, here in North Wales. Sisterhood of Avalon.org, unasafalan.com. Yeah, look up my name.
Yeah.
And you'll find me.
And you'll be there.
I'm the only one.
Pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, just look at my name. Like a rash, you'll find me. I'm on every social media platform going pretty much, or at least it feels like it. You can probably find me on the dark web as well, and deep in the crevices of all sorts of threads and Facebook and
Yeah.
Patreon and maybe OnlyFans, who knows, at some point. And yeah,
When needs must.
when needs.
When needs must. Well, thank you so much, Jhenah. Thank you so much, Mhara. And I hope that you have enjoyed this impromptu. Well, not really impromptu. Was it impromptu?
I don't know.
It
It was for me.
It was in the moment. It wasn't scripted. It was a genuine conversation.
And you know
which
what?
I enjoyed.
And that's exactly what I want this podcast to be. I mean, I love podcasts, right? On a long journey, I really enjoy listening to a podcast, but I also enjoy the ones where people are just having conversations and they're just being their real authentic selves. They're not trying to please an interviewer or come across as all, sagacious and liminal, just themselves. So thank you. That was lovely. That's
Thank you.
exactly what I wanted. And thank you also for watching and listening. And until next time, I've been Kristoffer Hughes. You have been you, and we shall see you next time. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi am wrando a wylio. Hwyl am y tro. Tra!